Our next speaker today is Mervyn John Alcock, MBE. This talk was to be conducted by Ajay Singh, but unfortunately he had to go off on an emergency. So I'll be standing in his place. Mervyn, I hope you are there.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Hello, yes, thank you for asking me to speak.
Okay, currently, Mervyn John Alcock is the general manager of the Barrowhill Roundhouse Centre, which is a highly successful commercial railway depot, museum, and event venue. Since 2000, he is the managing director of the Barrowhill Limited, a subsidiary of Barrowhill Engine Shed Society. Please correct me if I'm wrong somewhere. In 1989, he had founded the Barrowhill Engine Shed Society and formed the Barrowhill Engine Shed Action Group to preserve the last operational roundhouse in the UK. Since 2019, he is also the Rail Operations Director, St. Blaise Turntable Project. Earlier at the National Rail Museum, York, Mervyn led a number of projects, such as the 75th anniversary UK tour of World Steam Speed record holder A44468 Mallard. He also advised on the preservation and refurbishment of Derby Roundhouse, the world's first railway roundhouse, for the University of Derby. For the A1 Steam Locomotive Trust, he undertook a feasibility study as part of the charity's proposal to reopen Wezo Road, I hope I pronounced it correctly, Darlington, as an operational railway depot for the steam locomotive fleet, including A1 60163 Tornado and P2 Prince of Wales. Mervyn's work has led to numerous accolades and awards, culminating with an MBE for services to railway production and development in 2019. Just for the record of those who are not aware, MBE stands for Member of the Order of the British Empire. Mervyn will be talking to you on how a roundhouse was saved and how it is well and truly operational today. Over to you, Mervyn.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for that introduction. I'll try and share my screen. First, let me just get past the technology of that one. Yeah,
I can't. Yes, just click and just start.
Start where? Can everybody see that?
Yes, you can see it.
Okay. I don't know how to move it, just yet. Bear with me. Okay. Right,
yes,
so
perfectly.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. And my name is Mervyn Alcock. I'm the founder member of the project to save Barrowhill Roundhouse, which is was an operational railway depot. I'm also now the general manager and managing director of the limited company that runs the site. What I'd like to do today is to tell you the story from its original building in 1870 all the way through to today. And also some lessons I've learnt, and also how we've managed to turn what was a redundant building into a commercial enterprise, which has enabled it to be preserved. So if you just bear with me, I'll go through the whole story, and then at the end, if anybody would like to ask any questions, I will happily answer them. So first of all, Barrowhill Roundhouse. Well, what is it? Well, it is a square building, strangely enough, with a turntable in the middle, and I'm sure you're all aware of how roundhouses work around the world. This one has 24 roads, and it was built in 1870. The reason why it was built in 1870 was because there was an agreement signed between a local large industrial site called Staveley Iron and Coal Company and the Midland Railway, and it was a 100-year business agreement, which, as you can imagine, try and get in more than 5 years today, never mind 100 years. But anyway, they signed a 100-year agreement to provide locomotives to go over to the works and shunt the works, which produced spun pipes for gas, etc. So the agreement was signed in 1866. So then 4 years later, they built a depot specifically for the maintenance of the locomotives that would go over to the works. It also ran, the works itself had a huge industrial complex, miles and miles of track, and therefore they needed their own internal shunters. And here you see very famous one, which is one of the Staveley engines They would shunt their own internal wagons, but the Midland Railway would bring over the larger engines to take away the full loads. This is back into the Roundhouse, Barrowhill Roundhouse itself. You see the Roundhouse building in the background, and a very early 1950s shot of a couple of mainline steam locomotives being prepped, ready for going out onto the main line. The Roundhouse, like a lot of industrial railway locations, was situated right next door to houses and terraced houses, which were where the people who worked for the railway lived. And the railway ran right alongside these houses. And quite often the men who were driving the trains would shout to their wives, "I'm outside, would you like some coal?" And they would happily receive some coal off the back of the tender, illegitimately, free of charge, to be used on their fires for cooking, etc. So this is at the back of the Roundhouse, showing the houses which have now been demolished. This is the entrance line into the depot from the mainline system, and we still use this today. So this is taken in the 1950s, but we still use this very same mainline connection to bring in modern trains and charter trains. This is a small branch line. What I should say at this stage, the position of Barrowhill Roundhouse in the United Kingdom, it is positioned between a place called Chesterfield and Sheffield, which is very close to Manchester. So we're in the middle of the country, and this is a main freight train route that runs between Chesterfield and Sheffield. There's also a passenger route that runs Chesterfield, Sheffield, but that goes a different route to this freight line. Obviously, the steam locomotives, they were powered by coal. And here you see a very nice mid-1950s shot of the coal stage being used. A very simple arrangement where the wagons would be pushed up a ramp into the building you see on the left. Where the wagons would then be unloaded into small hoppers, and the hoppers would then be pushed to the edge of the building and tipped into the tender of the steam locomotive. A very effective way of refueling the engines. And you'll see later in the presentation, you'll see that we intend to put the coal stage back eventually. It was demolished prior to dieselization. Again, looking down the yard to the Roundhouse itself from a different direction, with the coal stage on your right this time, you can see a typical industrial railway yard: ash, coal, mess everywhere, and engines waiting their turn to go back out onto the main line. You can see the housing estate in the back, which is where all the people lived that worked at the depot. And you can see, I say, the coal stage and the ash pit drop, where they would drop the ash at the end of a session for the steam locomotive. At its height, around about 1955, there were over 300 people worked at Barrowhill Roundhouse, from firemen to cleaners to drivers. And obviously this guy is a driver who's just oiling around the engine before he sets off. A very industrial area, lots of collieries, and also you can see in the back of this picture there is a brickyard and brick kilns. And then the branch line, which the Roundhouse came off, that went further along for a couple of miles to a couple of collieries, a coking plant, and a stone quarry. So as with many countries around the world, Britain, of course, had a huge industrial activity in the early part of the 20th century, which is, of course, like a lot of places, reduced over the years. Steam started, the 100-year agreement made it possible that steam would be available at Barrowhill until 1966. So it was one of the latter survivors of steam use in the United Kingdom. But diesels were soon on their way, and the new kid on the block, as you can see, is starting to infiltrate the Roundhouse in this picture. You can see some diesel hydraulics, class 17 Claytons there, and a brush, class 31, a Sulzer brush, class 31. soon taking over the roundhouse and just squeezing the two little steam engines out of the picture, slowly but surely. And then at the end of 1966, steam was no longer used at Barrowhill Roundhouse for shunting over in the works nor on the main line. So these engines were unceremoniously dumped at the back of the shed, back of the roundhouse, alongside the houses, which I spoke about earlier, and left there to rot and eventually be taken away for scrap. So it had had 1870 to 1966. It had been a very busy depot, but now it was time for the diesels to take over. Luckily, one of these engines in this picture, 41708, this is now preserved, and we own the engine, and we are in the process of rebuilding it, but I will talk about that later on in the presentation. Okay, so another shot of the yard. You can see on the left now the coaling stage has been demolished, and this is well and truly the diesel era now. You can see passenger locomotives on your right-hand side alongside the brickyard, and you can see the freight engines, freight locomotives on your left-hand side on the coal stage, waiting for their next job. The what I call the half cab, the 41708, that was replaced by a diesel locomotive, a similar version, and in fact, the bottom of these locomotives were based on steam locomotives. You can see the wheel arrangement and the connecting rods. But these were diesel electric, and these were used to shunt the works after the steam locomotives had finished. Barrowhill Roundhouse was no different to many, many railway depots around the world. It was a very industrial, very mundane depot that had no real claim to fame. It didn't house any of the famous steam locomotives. It was a freight depot. However, it did, between the late 1960s and the early 1980s, it would hold an open day for the public, an open weekend, in fact, for the public to come. And the management of the depot would bring in from around the world, from around the country rather, they would bring in all sorts of special engines to show to the local people. And they would open the doors to what would normally be a private commercial railway, British Rail depot. They would open it to the public, including some very famous locomotives, including this built by Brush, known as Kestrel, HS 4000 Kestrel, which is a very, very powerful 4,000 horsepower diesel locomotive that ran on trials in the United Kingdom for a while. But in the end, it was sold to Russia and was never seen again, believed to have been scrapped, but nobody really knows its fate. But here it is at one of the Barrowhill open days in the early 1970s. Again, this is the inside of the roundhouse during one of the open days, open weekends, and you'll see lots of people wandering around, having a look at the engines that have specifically been spaced around. There's a famous story here of one of these pictures was picked out for an interpretation board for the museum, and I didn't pick it, but somebody did. And in the picture, there's a little boy with a big shock of ginger hair, with his train spotting book in his hand. And as I was putting together the interpretation board, I said, "That's me." And there I was in 1977, a young boy wandering around. And that is where my interest in Barrowhill Roundhouse started, which the story of which I'll expand on as we go through the presentation. So the new diesels had arrived, steam had long gone by here, and the Class 56s, which were huge 3,000 horsepower locomotives for moving the coal trains, they took over from the steam and the early diesel types. We can still see in the background that the small shunting locomotives for Staveley Works, Staveley Iron and Coal Works, they're still hanging on in the background, but it's very much a survivor at this point. It's a very old depot. It's purpose built for steam, really. But because of its position in the country and because it was close to collieries, etc., they still needed the depot for maintenance of the locomotives. So it was kept, even though it was, most engine sheds for the diesels were now straight engine sheds with modern facilities and fueling. This was a very old depot that managed to survive. Now, that's really one of the reasons we are here where we are today, because it managed to survive beyond all the other 300 odd, which all got knocked down and knocked down and demolished. But by fortune, this one didn't. So talk about my involvement now, because this is the last photograph I took in 1991, prior to the depot being closed, the Roundhouse being closed by British Rail. You can see that it's relevant. The engines are all named after the relevant collieries nearby, pits, and power stations that the coal fired. I became involved in railways in 1977 as a 12-year-old train spotter. My friend introduced me to train spotting. And of course, because I lived local to Barrowhill, I would regularly go down there on summer evenings and Sundays when the depot was closed to have a sneak round and take the numbers. So that's how I started. And I kept an eye on the place throughout my career in business, until I read an article in 1989 in a large UK magazine called Steam Railway, that the last operational roundhouse in Great Britain was due to be demolished. And I thought, well, that must be Barrowhill. I was at college at that point. I read the article and thought that must be Barrowhill. And indeed it was Barrowhill. So aged 22, I started a campaign to save the building from demolition. And I lobbied the local Chesterfield Borough Council, and I lobbied the magazines, and I set up a project which enabled us to convince the Chesterfield Borough Council that on the 8th of February, 2 days before demolition was due, 1991, we managed to put a preservation order on it, which stopped the building from being demolished. However, that was just the beginning of the story. You can see on the right-hand photograph here, you can see it didn't take long after closure in 1991 for Mother Nature to take over and start growing initially just weeds, but eventually a very large forest of silver birch trees, which we actually, funnily enough, was our first source of income. When we finally got hold of the building in 1997, we chopped all those trees down, logged them all up and sold the logs. But yes, you can see the difference between the original diesel shot I showed earlier on your left to a very similar position only a few years later. So it didn't take long for Mother Nature to take over, and it didn't take long for the vandals to come, and the thieves and the scrap thieves to come in to smash the windows and take away the metalwork. Quite a lot of the track work was stolen. Again, you can see the mess room, the water tower, the sand dryer, the sand hopper. These were all taken in 1993. And again, as you can see, windows being smashed, boards being removed, and again, the grass and trees growing. So the front of the building now has all been smashed through. You can see the walkway, but there's no boarding behind it. So as I say, it didn't take too long for the vandals to take a good hit at it. The original preparation pit was soon full of water. The track had been stolen. So it was the task was becoming larger and larger by the week. And I was a 24, 25-year-old at this stage. I was thinking, wow, this is some major project I've taken on here, and it's getting worse. But we were waiting, in fact, for the property board, British Rail Property Board, to release the property to the council, so we could then start to spend the money that we'd acquired. You can see that, again, the roof has now been heavily vandalized. I saw people, very young people, climbing along those steel beams there, just removing the lead strips that were holding the glass in place, and letting the glass fall through, and then collecting the lead and taking it to the scrapyard to exchange for money. So a very, very precarious thing to be doing, because that's a good 50 foot above ground level there. Well, you can see that the roof is quite heavily damaged now, and you can therefore let in the snow, a particular cold winter and the snow coming in. So the task, as I said earlier, the task was getting larger and larger. This is a view from the top of the steps. You can see a lot of original features survived with this roundhouse, as I mentioned earlier, even though it went into diesel ownership, including these three-legged shear legs here, which we used, solid oak, which we used for lifting locomotives off their wheels for the wheels to be exchanged for new wheels. So again, lots of things survived, and thankfully most of the major infrastructure survived the derelict period between 91 and 1996. Because if it hadn't done, we wouldn't have the facilities, we wouldn't have the history to show to people today. But what didn't survive was the glass and frankly the asbestos roof, which had to be removed anyway. So the Chesterfield Borough Council, one of our main supporters, decided that my madcap idea to save a roundhouse was a good idea, and they supported it and they approved the plans. This was November 1995. We had another year of negotiation with British Rail Property Board before the end of December 96, where I went to a meeting in London with the Heritage Railways Association, who basically said that there's a young man here trying to save a very important part of our Victorian railway history, and he's being thwarted by powers that be. So in the end, they basically embarrassed the property board, and the property board agreed to release the roundhouse and the 20 acres that goes with it to Chesterfield Borough Council for the price of £1, a nominal sum, at the end of 1996. So we had some grants in place to the tune of 350,000, and we finally had possession of the building. It was, of course, extremely derelict now and needed some serious renovation. Luckily, as I say, we had raised 350,000 and the renovation began. The first thing we did was to completely replace the asbestos and glass roof, what was left, and we replaced it with a cement sheet and a plastic see-through glass replacement, in keeping with the original roof, of the same design but a different material. So this is the huge £200,000 at the time, which in 1997 was quite a lot of money. Well, this was the complete re-roofing of the steel beams, including the foreman's office, which is where the foreman operated out of. You can slowly see the site beginning to come back together again. So in the initial period, in 1997, we rebuilt it. And then in 1998, just the roundhouse itself, not the yard or not the coaling stage or anything else, that was all in a position to start taking exhibits. So our first locomotive was from the National Railway Museum in York, England. We agreed that the roundhouse was a suitable place to have one of their very valuable exhibits. So they agreed to send what was basically what they call a crab, which was an industrial freight locomotive. So they sent two 700 by road, and this was the first locomotive I took onto the site, and obviously a very, very prestigious time and a very valuable loco. And things happen along the way, don't they? But on the way to Barrowhill from York, the lorry driver who was bringing it here called me and said that he'd had an accident with a bus and that the bus had hit the locomotive. So I was very concerned. So I zoomed up in my car to find out what had happened. And it was luckily the engine had just got a dented grab rail, but the bus, the fiberglass bus, was a complete write-off. So you see the difference between the railway engineering and bus engineering there and then. So we started, so we were back in business, and this was our first locomotive. So try and give you some idea on the amount of work that's taken place in the roundhouse to get it to where it is today. You can see the original 1950s steam locomotive photograph on your left. You can see the dereliction photograph on your right, and then you can see in the middle. In the middle, you can see the finished product. With some of our preserved vehicles underneath. That's a huge amount of work taking place over a large number of years. One of the things that I'm most proud of with the success of Barrowhill is we've saved a very large piece of history and an important part of some people's lives who are now no longer with us. You take this photograph here, The one on the left was taken in 1880 of a steam crew preparing their locomotive. And you can see on the right-hand side a photograph I took this week. And whilst the building on the left is different, this is now a mess room, but on the left you can see that was a railway shed. But you can still see that the water tower window, and the sand drying chimney are all still in situ today. That's over 140 years later. So that's one of the things that we're proud of at Barrowhill, is that we've saved a little bit of history and a little bit of some people's previous lives as well. It didn't take too long before we realised we had to fund this place. So we needed to find money. And that's one of the key things I'd like to talk about at the end of the presentation, is about preserving things for a reason rather than preserving things for just preserving, because you have to raise money. We have a great set of volunteers here who do a huge amount of work, both in administratively and management wise, all the way down to hands-on painting and repairing. However, you have to have money to pay the bills, the electricity bill, repair bills, etc., etc. So my business plan for this place was always to set up commercial operation. And because we're centrally positioned in the United Kingdom, because we have a mainline connection, because we have quite a lot of land, we decided to build some buildings, some additional buildings to the Roundhouse, to create a space for other businesses, third-party businesses, to come along and transact their business, repair vehicles, rebuild vehicles, and create a business and create jobs. In this particular shop, this is one of the buildings we built, and this is one of the companies completely refurbishing, repainting a carriage for the outside world, for a customer. We have three different buildings. One is for carriage and wagon, which is this one. One is for locomotives with an overhead crane, lifting jacks, pits, etc. And then we have a third building, which is for bogies, wheel sets, and all three work well. All three are different companies, but they work well together. Because we are mainline connected straight onto the main system, to main railway system in the UK, we can take vehicles on and off for repair, maintenance, stabling, or even transition. For instance, the photograph on the left is a track machine, a tamping machine for tamping ballast that came in by rail from Leeds, which is about 50 miles away. And then it was taken onto our unloading pad to be loaded onto a road transport to be taken to the Channel Tunnel to work down there. So that's another source of our income, is a transition. And then the photograph on the right, we work with all the large railway companies in this country, in the United Kingdom, sorry, and including Network Rail, who are the owners of the infrastructure throughout the whole country. This engine is coming in for maintenance off the main line. The mainline connection is just behind this locomotive. In 2018, we had a huge contract to be the maintenance and servicing for 90 nights of East Midlands Railways, East Midlands Trains, which are the local operator that runs from here, Sheffield, Chesterfield into London, for 90 nights while they refurbished Derby Railway Station, which is a very large railway hub in the United Kingdom. And they couldn't get in and out of their own depot, so some of the vehicles came to us. To enable us to undertake that work, we had £1.5 million of investment from Network Rail and East Midlands Railway to put in brand new sidings, walkways, lighted walkways, fuel, water, and CET, controlled emission tanks, toilet waste, basically. And that gave us a huge lift into the real world and enable us to go forward to today as a commercial depot, and those facilities are still used. So you can see some of these facilities being used on site. I think it's worth remembering as we go through this presentation that you're talking about an 1870 steam building, which was closed in 91 and deemed redundant, which we reopened in 98, sorry, primarily as a museum, which is developed, but then took great legs and ran and became full circle to become a real working railway depot again. And this is an example of the old and the new. This is one of the East Midlands Railway's high-speed train power cars that needed turning. So we were able to use an 1870s turntable to turn what at the time was a new piece of kit, a new piece of locomotive rolling stock. These are some of the new sidings that are built for the various East Midlands passenger trains which run around the system to this day, and East Midlands Trains are still one of our customers. The one thing we have found here is we need a large and mixed portfolio of commercial income. So not only do we service trains, maintain trains, stable trains, but we also offer the site up for rail research. A lot of major rail research programs have taken place here at Barrowhill. This is one from Newcastle University, and it's basically it's a ground penetrating radar system test that was on a road rail vehicle that was used inside the roundhouse with buried pipes in a pit, and then up the branch to test the track. It's a very useful site. We have a lot of different areas that can be used for that kind of testing. And again, I emphasize the point that this was an 1870 building, closed in 91, reopened in 98 as a museum, but then took off. And here we have some of the latest rail locomotive technology in the United Kingdom here at Barrowhill being maintained and serviced. Now, I've given an example of why and how we're here with the commercial, but this is going back to why we're here. I originally saved the building because it was my childhood memory train spotting depot, but also it was an important piece of Victorian railway architecture. What the commercial income has enabled us to do is to invest in the building, tidy the building up, but also to attract partners. These two locomotives are from the National Railway Museum in York, and they deemed that we were safe enough, secure enough, and a viable business to house some extremely valuable and rare locomotives. So inside the roundhouse, we have a nice display now of modern and old, and we have a good relationship with the museum in York. I talked about the commercial diesel modern maintenance that we do, but also we are capable of servicing heritage steam that is still active on the main system in the United Kingdom. So the one on the left was a rail tour from London with passengers on, which we turned the locomotive to enable it to go back to London. And the one on the right is Bahamas, a very famous Jubilee class steam locomotive, taking water from what was originally a sandhopper, but we've now converted that to water, taking water and being serviced to go back to Birmingham in the middle of the country. Another contract we have is with the Orient Express. I'm sure you'll all be aware of the Orient Express. This has come from London to a very large stately home near us called Chatsworth, where the Duke of Devonshire lives. He's our patron. He's the Barrowhill Roundhouse patron. And it comes to Chesterfield, which is where the passengers disembark. They get on coaches and go to visit the stately home. While they're visiting the stately home, this train comes empty stock into the roundhouse, and we water it, service it, and take off the rubbish. So again, the reuse of what was once a redundant depot into a very active depot. And we were fortunate in 2019 to receive £1.5 million from the Heritage Lottery Fund. We'd reached a position with our reputation where they felt we were viable enough to invest in. So on the site, attached to the roundhouse, we've built a purpose-built commercial kitchen and eating area, conference area, and as you can see, it's used for all sorts of different things. Award ceremonies for the national railway companies, but also training seminars and even birthday parties and weddings. So it's a very flexible space, and again, another string to our financial income bow. However, 20 acres of site, of railway site that's been around for a long time, doesn't come without its requirements for maintenance and upgrades. So here you see in the next few slides, here you'll see that we are improving, repairing, maintaining. The mainline connection that takes our trains to the mainline needed a retaining wall. So we built, we had a contractor in who built a 50-meter long retaining wall. That wasn't cheap, but again, that kind of money comes from the commercial income. And you can see the retaining wall being built and the finished item. This is our mainline connection, which was in need of a higher speed point for a company that required to test wagons and buffers. So we basically relayed again. We had a contractor in who relayed the whole switch, the whole point, into the compound to make it a faster ability, an ability to take faster vehicles over it. Again, this all comes at a cost. And of course, my raison d'etre and the raison d'etre of the team here at Barrowhill is to keep the Roundhouse safe for the future generations. So this needs maintenance and this needs painting, etc. Excuse me. So every year we have a maintenance regime which paints the inside of the exhibition areas, the museum areas, and paints the outside windows, windowsills, etc. And you can see that they're painted in the Midland Railway colours. And again, this all comes from the commercial generation, the income generated from commercial work. We imported a signal box, which was very similar to the original signal box that used to stand there until it was burnt down in the early 1970s. So we imported a very similar Midland Railway box. We rebuilt it, and again, 5-6 years into it being here, it had to be repainted. So all things are constantly refreshed and regenerated, including the inside of the signal box. It has a very good view of the Roundhouse site, of all angles, up the branch, down to the main line, down to the Roundhouse itself, and recently been refurbished by the volunteers here, and is a very popular visitor attraction. The way we operate the site it has two parts to it. It has the commercial side and it has the museum side. Mondays to Friday, the commercial side runs, and we don't have visitors other than special invited groups. And then Saturdays and Sundays, the commercial side closes and the public side opens. So we're able to manage the mix between public and volunteers and the commercial and employed people. We were able to split the two and allow them to work well together. Again, small maintenance needed. The cobbles needed relaying. The door to the Roundhouse water tower needed replacing, and this was done in a combination of some commercial contractors and some volunteer work. I talked about 41708, which is a 060 steam locomotive that belonged to the Roundhouse and used to go over to Staveley Iron and Coal Works to do the shunting and to collect the trains. Well, we've managed to buy this, excuse me, we've managed to acquire this, and we've raised enough funds through commercial activity to be able to re-steam it. So here is a couple of photographs of it being taken to pieces, ready for the boiler and the engine to go to a specialist steam locomotive rebuild works in Birmingham at Tyseley, and where we are able to fund the restoration of the steam locomotive. It will come back and act as a flagship at the Roundhouse during events, and it will also travel the country to other railways, again, to carry the name Barrowhill Roundhouse and act as a flagship for us. But an important part of the Roundhouse's history and an important part of our future. Again, we do all sorts of different things. As I keep saying, it's commercial, it's museum, but also we have staged events, very large events, gatherings of steam locomotives, themed events. This was LNER, London North Eastern Railway theme. And you can see we've got some very famous steam locos on here. Blue Peter, Mallard, Bittern, Tornado, etc. So we have been the host to some considerable events, which gives you an indication of our reputation now within the movement in the United Kingdom. And there we have Mallard with its sister engine, Bittern, photographed in the yard at one of the events. We have many times, not just once, but we have been host to, arguably, I'm sure it is arguable as well, but one of the most famous locomotives in the world, if not the most famous. Flying Scotsman, of course, the world steam speed holder, 126 miles per hour. And this has been at the Roundhouse a number of times. There was as part of the Heritage Lottery Fund reopening, there was a play written about Staveley and about Barrowhill and about the area and its industrial history. But also the play was a story written about myself and my involvement as a boy and how I'd got involved in saving it all the way through to today. And I'm very proud to say that the Flying Scotsman was the engine that came in at the finale of the play onto the turntable, and I gave a speech, which was a very proud moment. But again, you can see the prestige of the site. We are regarded as a very good place for people to take their valuable engines. Another string to our bow is we have concerts. We hold, the Roundhouse itself is large enough to take big venue concerts, big venue festivals. So once a year, we empty the Roundhouse of all the locomotives and it becomes an event venue. And we have famous people. I don't know how famous these people are around the world, but they're very famous in the United Kingdom. Jules Holland, very famous pianist and artist. And with him on this picture is a Spice Girl, a Sporty Spice, of the famous Spice Girls, at least famous in this country anyway. And this is the view looking the other way from the stage at the audience. You can see the Roundhouse clearly with the smoke hoods and the windows. But for this particular event, it's a music venue, not a railway depot. And this is the view from the stage looking at the expectant audience who are waiting for Jules Holland to perform. We also hold a very large beer festival there, which is gin, beer, Prosecco, wine, and everything. Of course, we don't let that go anywhere near the drivers of the trains, but everything is fenced off, and it's a very, very successful festival and another source of income to keep the museum and the Roundhouse alive. Because of the uniqueness of the building, we are used very regularly for TV productions, and there's a very large fundraising activity takes place in this country called Children in Need. And we were the host for Children in Need one year. And there's Pudsey Bear, which is the mascot of Children in Need. I started this project to save my childhood depot and the fact that it was a childhood train spotting depot and the fact that it was a famous Victorian building. I didn't save it for any accolades or awards or thanks. I just did it because I wanted to do it. However, due to the phenomenal success of the place, I have received some awards and we have received some awards, because you'll be aware that whilst one man might be the figurehead, might be the leader, maybe the instigator, but it takes a lot of people to make it happen. And I have still got some very, very good people here, both voluntary and commercially paid, who are very supportive, very skillful. And so these awards, I always accept these awards on behalf of everybody, not just myself. Well, there's a very young me on the left receiving Preservationist of the Year in 1998 when we first opened, and then a much older version of me on the right hand side a couple of years ago receiving the MBE, which at Buckingham Palace, which was a fantastic award and gratefully received on behalf of everybody who'd helped. But mum and dad were still alive then, and they were there, and they were particularly proud, which is a good thing. We've also received a number of other awards from national preservation organisations and magazines, and even the Engineering Heritage Award from the commercial engineers in the UK, which is a very prestigious award. So we've obviously done something right, and we've obviously followed the correct path. And just to come to the end now, really, before, if anybody wants to ask any questions, that's great. But just to finish off, what about the future? Well, I've had over 30 years involved in it. So have a lot of other people. We've worked very hard to convert what was a derelict site into a thriving commercial railway depot and museum. And we want to preserve that for the future. And we want to ensure that, that it's safeguarded for the future. Now, what we now do is move on to the next chapter. We have been awarded over £4.5 million to build, as you can see on this left-hand photograph here, basically a rail research, a college, training university, and rail depot to train future people, to give them qualifications, to etc. etc. And that is a considerable movement forward for us, and it will give the site a stable and consistent income, but also it'll bring youngsters into the place and young people who will want to train. We already encourage the next generation. We have events for children, we have school visits, and out of those, some of them will become interested in railways. Some of them will want to end up taking over from me and the rest of the management team, hopefully. But we are acutely aware of the need for the next generation to be part of it. What have I learned over 30 years? Well, the one thing I would say is that you cannot preserve something just for the sake of preserving it. There has to be a reason for it, and there has to be a use for it. That might be an educational use, it might be a practical use, or it might be, in the case of the Roundhouse, it may be a reintroduction into the commercial railway industry that provides the funding. But I think you see too many things around this country, and I'm sure it's the same around the world, where things have been preserved and are left to rot, and they're in a siding or in an overgrown jungle, and there is no purpose for them. And I think it's very important to be quite harsh sometimes and quite strict on what you do and why you do it. And you have to find a way of funding it. And we have a great volunteer team here. In fact, you may have heard some shunting noises in the background there. They're repositioning ready for a public visit today. And we also have a great management team. We also have a great paid staff. But you have to find a way of funding it. So there are three things I would say is preserve for a reason. And my experience is now asked for around the country. I'm helping another project in Cornwall because I've learned a few lessons along the line, which I'm happy to share with other people. I also think it's about collaboration with good people, get the right people involved. Dangerous to get the wrong people involved in a project that they don't understand or don't share the same vision. And thirdly, I think it's about perseverance and leaving a legacy for future generations to enjoy as much as we and the previous generations have enjoyed. So there's my presentation on saving a Roundhouse. I hope I've not bored anybody's senses. I hope everybody's still awake. And you can see the final shot gives you an aerial view of our what is not just the Roundhouse at the back of the picture, but also you see the new buildings, the commercial workshops, and the integration and the overlapping between the two things. And it's brought the area a lot of prosperity. And when we have the beer festival, for instance, there are 8,000 people come here and stay in hotels and buy food in the shops and restaurants. And there on this site now, you have 40 people who are full-time, as well as a team of 20 volunteers. So there is my presentation, Saving a Roundhouse. I hope everybody enjoyed it, and I hope people have taken something from it. And I think that's it. If anybody would like to ask any questions, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mervyn. First, congratulations on a very, very successful project that is not only doing good work, but also self-sustaining. I think the advice you gave at the end is something we need to follow, because for some reason we don't follow that model in India. What you said was perfect, that if you want to do something, we must have a reason for it, and then we must make it self-sustaining. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. But ultimately, you have to have money, whether you like it or not.
Yes.
One of our participants had remarked that they could hear a whistle in the background. So you obviously have a scheme logo working somewhere nearby.
Sorry, say that again, sorry.
I said somebody had remarked that while you were presenting, we could hear a scheme loco whistle in the background.
Yes.
So obviously you have a locomotive working nearby.
Yes, we do this morning. We're open to the public today, and I'm in one of the anti-officers. So
Okay.
yes, you can hear real, genuine roundhouse noises in the background. Yes.
Just for information, how many roundhouses were there in the UK at the height of the roundhouses?
There were around about 380, 400 roundhouses, and there's only about 4 left. We're the only operational one with tracking, and there are one is a tire garage, one is a store, but yeah, one is a grain store, a food store. But yeah, there was about 380, 400 of them, and we are the last one. And someone has just asked.
Very interesting, because in spite of a very large system in India and a large number of steam locos running, we only had 5 or 6 roundhouses. All the rest were the normal conventional, in one-line depots.
Yeah,
it's a very 5 or 6, and none are. Some still exist, but none of them are operational. And we are trying hard that at least 1 or 2 of them are saved and converted to museums.
It's a very effective way of storing engines, obviously, because you can get at any one time. But it's also a very useful venue for displaying engines right around house as well. I think one of the questions was, what is the Heritage Lottery Fund? Well, that's a national fund here where basically people, myself, put on a lottery ticket and hope to win a fortune. And the funds, the surplus funds from that are then distributed back down to projects like ourselves to help capital projects. So it's a lottery, but the funds are distributed to preservation projects, etc. I see there's lots of comments. I can't see them all actually, but I saw that was one of the questions.
No, there are a number of comments and all positive.
Yes, yeah, good. That's good. Yeah, well, share the one have just come up from Share the Experience, the A1 Trust. Well, the A1 Trust, I've been I've been very heavily involved with the A1 Trust, and they have a great model as well. They fundraise on a commercial basis, on a rather than just trying to sell pencils and postcards. They commercially raise a large sums of money to rebuild, to build from scratch actually, the Peppercorn Tornado A1, which is a huge locomotive and a very famous one. So their model is very similar to Barrowhill. They use a commercial approach for fundraising, and they've been very successful as well.
One question asked is, you might see it in the chat box, what is the Heritage Lottery Fund and who gives accreditation to accredited museums? Right.
Well, the Heritage Lottery Fund is, as I just said, it's a lottery where the public pay, and then any surplus funds are then redistributed to charitable organisations and worthy projects. Accreditation is the Arts Council. It's a government body in this country called the Arts Council, and they basically, you have to apply for accreditation. You have to prove that you are contributing to the public awareness of your project, historical, etc. And when they believe that you are worthy, they will give you accreditation status. We're currently renewing that at the moment. It's quite a large document, but when you do get that, it gives you access to grant funding and to grants.
One thought that I had for the museum, I presume you can have a lot of volunteers running the museum. But I presume that for the maintenance and the other work that you are doing, you have permanent paid staff?
Yes, we have a volunteer workforce that comes at the weekends and occasionally during the week, but mostly at the weekends. And they maintain our railway vehicles, they maintain the roundhouse, the infrastructure, but on a lower level than the contractors who we bring in for the larger work. And then, yes, we pay people. There are paid staff during the week to operate the depot, because of course we are in effect a very large railway industrial estate, and we have lots of customers who are based here, and they need servicing, they need trains moving in and out, they need maintenance of their own the buildings they rent. So yeah, we have a large paid staff during the week and a volunteer workforce at the weekends.
In fact, the volunteers that you have for heritage runs and museums in the UK, I wish we could replicate that in India. Unfortunately, we've not been able to do it.
Yes, so I was told. I spoke to David Charlesworth prior to this interview, and he was telling me that there is an issue with that. But yeah, we have a very large volunteer workforce in this country who come and maintain the railways and the preserved railways as a hobby. Yeah, so they don't expect to get paid.
But your idea of having a museum and a running depot, a maintenance depot, doing work together and one sustaining the other, I think that's a very good idea and a good model to follow.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, well, it's a model I adopted very early on in this project, and it's a model that's worked. It's also a model that a lot of other railways in this country, preserved railways in this country, are now starting to follow. So yeah, we were trailblazers in that department.
Okay, no, good to know. In fact, maybe we'll write to you to see if we can do something like that here also.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
One question that I'm intrigued by, you mentioned a locomotive that had come to you only for turning.
Yes.
Did you charge for that also, for turning it?
Yes. Yes. We do.
So
yes, we do.
You are really commercial.
Yes, very commercial.
But you have to be. To survive, you have to be commercial.
Yes, we are very aware that everything needs paying for, so therefore everything has to pay.
Okay, if there are any more questions, please request you to either raise your hand or put them in the chat box.
May I speak, sir?
Apurva wants to ask the question.
Yeah, there's one technical word which I wanted. It was not very clear. The oak tripod that you had, the block and tackle for lifting the loco, you called it by a special name. I couldn't catch that name.
Yes, it's called shear. We don't actually know really why this is the case, but historically they're called shear legs. SHEER.
Shear
And
legs.
Shear legs. Yes, it's a three-legged tripod that basically had a block and tackle in the apex, and they lifted in a pulley system.
Okay. Another question I had is that the people who give all this property to you for £1, have they ever come back to you that we gave it to you free, thinking that you will do it for the public good, but you've made it into a commercial organization and you're earning money? So pay us back.
No, they haven't, because they didn't want the responsibility. Whilst we do have a commercial operation, we do have a huge contribution to the public as well in the form of the museum and access to the museum. So no, they didn't want that liability. They wanted rid of it, and we took the risk and took that liability. So all the commercial funds, the setup here is all the commercial funds, once the bills are paid, all the surplus, the profit, is gift aided and transferred over to the charity. So the limited company does feed the charity on an annual basis. So any money that's not used for covering the costs and paying the bills is at the end of the year transferred over to the charity.
And you're self-sustaining and making profits?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thanks. Do you also maintain diesels?
Yes, we maintain diesels as well. Yeah, the modern ones and the historic ones as well.
Yes, okay. And
I think we've had an excellent presentation, and perhaps more good ideas than we had expected.
Yeah, this is just
Thank you very much.
A very short story of a long story. Yeah.
No, we'll certainly, as a society, will be in touch with you to see what we can do, how we can commercialize, and how we can do better.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, no
Thanks
problem.
a lot. Thanks a lot for an excellent presentation.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.